A dedicated white woman named Grace, focused on climbing the corporate ladder, has an unexpected encounter with a calm and composed black man named Leonard during her daily office routine. Little does Grace know that this brief interaction with Leonard, whom she mistakenly judges based on appearances, will set off a series of events that will turn her world upside down. How did a simple elevator ride lead to such a transformative moment for Grace? And how did her encounter with Leonard change her perspective in ways she never anticipated? Let's uncover the story behind this eye-opening experience. But before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this tale of self-discovery and unexpected revelations, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sunlight filtered through the skyscrapers of the city as Grace hurried down the busy sidewalk, her heels clicking briskly on the pavement. She was a 34-year-old white woman, sharp, determined, and laser-focused on her career. As a senior marketing strategist for one of the biggest firms in the city, Grace had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, her eyes always set on the next promotion. She had a big presentation coming, one she'd spent the entire weekend perfecting. Every detail had to be flawless. Her mind buzzed with last-minute thoughts about the presentation. I hope the slides are in the right order. Did I send that email to Tom? She muttered under her breath as she approached the towering office building. The large glass windows reflected her anxious expression. Grace prided herself on being composed under pressure, but today, stress was creeping in. She couldn't afford any mistakes. Grace pushed through the revolving doors, already imagining the reaction of her boss and colleagues when she nailed the presentation. The promotion she was gunning for felt almost within reach, but she knew how crucial today was. One misstep, one misplaced word, and the opportunity could slip right through her fingers. She checked her watch. 8:40 a.m. She had 20 minutes before the meeting. Enough time to calm her nerves, if she could just get to her office without any interruptions. As she strode through the sleek, modern lobby, her eyes caught sight of the elevator at the far end. She quickened her pace, eager to avoid the crowd gathering behind her. Her hand reached out to press the elevator button just as a man stepped up beside her. Grace glanced sideways, her gaze lingering briefly on the man standing next to her. He was black, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a neat but understated suit. Something about his calm presence felt oddly out of place amid the morning rush. Grace didn't recognize him, which wasn't unusual. She didn't pay attention to most of the people in the building. Still, her mind, already swirling with anxiety, quickly assessed him. Maybe he was a delivery person, or someone here for a meeting. She didn't think much more of it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Grace stepped forward, instinctively placing herself in the center. The man took a step as well, but Grace hesitated. Without thinking, she shifted back slightly, pretending to fiddle with the files in her hands. She felt a twinge of discomfort. Not enough to admit it to herself fully, but just enough that she wasn't ready to share the confined space of the elevator. I should take this one alone, she thought, barely aware of her own reasoning. I need to focus. I can't get distracted right now. The man, noticing her hesitation, made no fuss. With a small, polite nod, he stepped back, allowing her to go ahead. Grace stepped inside the elevator, pressing the button for her floor. As the doors slid shut, she breathed a small sigh of relief, grateful for the few moments of solitude. She hadn't consciously registered why she felt uncomfortable sharing the elevator, but she justified it in her mind. I need to be alone right now, just to get my head straight. The ride up was quiet, but her thoughts were anything but. She stared at the numbers lighting up above the door, counting down to her floor. Her presentation flashed through her mind again, and she rehearsed the opening lines. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm excited to present a new marketing strategy that will not only increase our reach, but also redefine how we engage with our audience. She shook her head slightly. No, that sounds too stiff, she thought. I need to sound more confident, more natural. She practiced the line again in her head, determined to make the right impression. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to her floor. Grace stepped out, her mind already back on the task at hand. The brief moment of discomfort in the lobby was forgotten, replaced by the pressing concerns of the day. She walked quickly down the hallway toward her office, eager to review her notes one last time. Back in the lobby, Leonard watched the elevator doors close, feeling the subtle tension that had passed between them. He wasn't offended. He'd experienced this kind of hesitation many times before. People often made snap judgments about him, especially in places like this. But Leonard had learned long ago not to let such moments bother him. His calm, composed demeanor was a product of years of dealing with assumptions and overcoming them. With a quiet sigh, Leonard pressed the button for the next elevator. He didn't mind waiting. He was in no rush. His role as CEO of the building's parent company gave him the luxury of setting his own schedule, though few people in the building knew his identity. He preferred it that way. Leonard valued his privacy and rarely advertised his position. Most of the employees had never seen him, and those who had probably didn't realize who he was. As he stepped into the next elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, Leonard's thoughts drifted toward the day ahead. He had several meetings lined up, but one in particular stood out. He'd scheduled a discussion with the company's senior leadership about the future direction of the firm. Leonard was passionate about shaping the company into a more inclusive, innovative environment. He had big plans, but he knew change wouldn't come easily. There were still deep-rooted biases in the corporate world, and while his position gave him influence, it also meant he had to navigate those biases carefully. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor, a space that reflected the success Leonard had built over the years. The office was luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. Leonard didn't care much for the lavishness, but he understood its purpose. It signaled authority and power to those who visited. He walked down the quiet hallway toward his office, nodding at a few of his staff members as he passed. Inside, his assistant, Rachel, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards. Your first meeting is in 30 minutes. Shall I bring you the agenda?" Leonard nodded, taking a seat behind his desk. "Thank you, Rachel. That would be great." As Rachel handed him the papers, Leonard glanced over them quickly. Today's meeting was critical. He was pushing for the company to adopt a new initiative aimed at increasing diversity in leadership roles. It was something he felt passionate about, not just as a business strategy, but as a personal mission. Leonard had spent his career breaking through glass ceilings and dismantling stereotypes, and he wanted to ensure others had the same opportunities. Rachel left the room, and Leonard leaned back in his chair, gazing out at the skyline. His thoughts briefly wandered back to the woman from the elevator. He didn't know her name, but her subtle hesitation had been familiar. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it, and it wouldn't be the last. But Leonard wasn't one to dwell on such things. He preferred to focus on the bigger picture, on making the changes that would ultimately create a better, more inclusive environment for everyone, even those who didn't realize they needed it yet. Back in her office, Grace took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervous energy buzzing through her. She flipped open her laptop and skimmed through her presentation one last time. Everything seemed in order, but there was still a nagging doubt in the back of her mind. "Okay, Grace, you've got this," she whispered to herself. "Just stay focused." Her phone buzzed on the desk, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was a reminder for the meeting. 10 minutes left. Grace stood up, smoothing down her skirt and gathering her files. She took one last glance in the mirror, her professional, polished appearance reflecting back at her. This was her moment to shine. As she headed toward the conference room, Grace walked with purpose, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She was ready. Today would go perfectly, she told herself. Everything was under control. The executives she was presenting to weren't the type to be easily impressed, and she had heard whispers that the CEO himself would eventually review her ideas. The CEO. She had never met him, but the mere thought of him made her feel a bit on edge. From what little she had heard, he was a private man, someone who stayed in the background but wielded a lot of influence. Grace had imagined him as an older, distinguished white man with a commanding presence, someone who would look the part of a powerful corporate leader. Just the idea of presenting her work to him someday sent her anxiety into overdrive. As she entered the conference room, the executives were already seated, each of them with a laptop open in front of them, ready to take notes. Her supervisor, Linda, a sharp-eyed woman with decades of experience, gave her a small nod as Grace set up her presentation. Linda's presence was both reassuring and intimidating. She had been in the company for years and was a strong advocate for Grace's work, but she was also known for being tough and brutally honest when it came to feedback. "Morning, Grace," Linda said, her tone brisk but not unfriendly. "Ready to knock it out of the park?" "Absolutely," Grace replied, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and launched into her presentation, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling just below the surface. Slide after slide, she detailed her marketing strategy, explaining how it would help the company not only increase its reach, but also modernize its approach in ways that would appeal to a broader audience. As she spoke, she made sure to maintain eye contact with the executives, gauging their reactions. She noticed a few nods, a couple of raised eyebrows, and scribbled notes, which she took as good signs. "And finally," Grace said, moving to her last slide, "with this strategy, we can expect a significant increase in engagement and brand loyalty, as well as a boost in overall revenue within the next 2 quarters. She paused, giving the executives a moment to absorb everything. Then, she closed with, "I'm confident that this approach will position us ahead of our competitors and set the standard for how we engage with our target market moving forward." For a second, the room was silent. Grace's palms felt sweaty, but she maintained her composure. Then Linda spoke up. "Excellent work, Grace," she said, her expression thoughtful. "I think this is exactly what we need right now." There were murmurs of agreement around the table, and Grace allowed herself to relax just a little. The presentation had gone well. She could feel it. She had done her part. Linda continued, "I'll be forwarding your proposal to the CEO for review. He likes to be involved in these kinds of decisions, especially when it comes to strategic shifts like this. You should feel proud." Grace's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the CEO. The thought of her ideas being scrutinized by him made her both thrilled and anxious. But for now, she let herself bask in the praise. This was a big step forward, and she had done everything she could. After the meeting, Grace felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She made her way back to her office, but first, she decided to grab a quick coffee from the cafe on the ground floor. The caffeine would help settle her nerves, she reasoned. She stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors were about to close, someone else stepped in, Leonard, the same man from earlier. Grace's heart skipped a beat. She recognized him immediately, and this time, there was no avoiding the interaction. He stood tall, his posture relaxed but confident. There was something about him, his calmness, his self-assuredness, that made her pause. "Good morning," Leonard said politely, his voice deep and composed. Grace offered a small smile and nodded. "Morning," she replied, feeling a flicker of discomfort again. She didn't know why, but being around him unsettled her. It wasn't anything overt. It was just a feeling she couldn't quite shake. Maybe it was because he seemed so at ease, while she was still reeling from the stress of her presentation. The elevator hummed quietly as it descended, the silence between them growing awkward. Grace glanced sideways at Leonard, noticing the way he stood there, completely unfazed. For a split second, she wondered if she had misjudged him. He didn't carry himself like a low-level employee or a visitor. In fact, he seemed like someone with authority, someone who belonged. But she pushed the thought aside. Her mind was still too wrapped up in the presentation, in the CEO's impending review of her work. She couldn't afford to get distracted by idle curiosity about this man. As the elevator reached the lobby, the doors slid open, and they both stepped out. Leonard gave her a brief nod before walking away, heading toward the higher floors. Grace watched him go, her mind racing. Something about him seemed different this time, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Shaking off the feeling, she made her way to the cafe. She had more important things to worry about. Later that afternoon, Grace sat at a table in the company's cafeteria with a few of her colleagues, picking at her salad while they gossiped about work. The conversation eventually shifted to the CEO, who remained an enigma to most of the employees. "I've only seen him once," said Emily, one of Grace's co-workers, her eyes wide with curiosity. "He's like a ghost. No one ever really sees him, but apparently he's super hands-on with the big projects." "I heard he's pretty intimidating," added Brian, another colleague. "A real no-nonsense kind of guy." But you know, that's what it takes to run a company this size. Grace listened, intrigued. She had never really thought much about the CEO before. She had been too focused on her own work, her own ambitions. But now that her ideas were being sent to him for review, she found herself wondering what he was like. She imagined him as a commanding figure, someone who had spent decades building his empire. A man with silver hair, a stern face, and an air of authority. Someone who could make or break careers with a single decision. I wonder what he's like in person. Grace mused aloud, her voice thoughtful. I mean, he must be some kind of genius to have built all of this. Emily shrugged. Who knows? He's probably just another rich old guy in a suit. Brian laughed. Yeah, but a powerful one. People say he's really hands-on when it comes to company culture. Like he's all about diversity and stuff. Grace raised an eyebrow. That didn't quite fit with the image she had in her head, but she didn't dwell on it. The idea of presenting her work to the CEO still made her stomach flip, but she hoped it would be a stepping stone to bigger things. As the day went on, Grace couldn't stop thinking about the CEO. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she knew about the man who controlled so much of her future. If he liked her ideas, it could mean a promotion. If not, it could set her back months, even years in her career. She sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, her thoughts drifting. Her mind kept circling back to the elevator encounter with Leonard. His calm confidence, the way he carried himself, it was so different from how most people acted around the office. Most employees were either rushing from one meeting to the next or frantically typing away at their desks, but Leonard had seemed completely at ease. For a brief moment, Grace wondered if she had been wrong about him. Could he be more important than she initially thought? But the idea was fleeting, quickly brushed aside by her own assumptions. After all, she had seen him waiting for the elevator just like any other employee. If he held a high position, wouldn't he have his own private office or at least an executive elevator? Grace sighed, shaking her head. She was overthinking it. There was no need to speculate about Leonard. She had enough on her plate without worrying about the people she passed in the hallways. But still, the nagging feeling lingered. Something about him just didn't add up. The next day, Grace entered the lobby of the towering office building, her mind already racing with the day's tasks. She had spent the night tossing and turning, thinking about the looming CEO review of her presentation. The morning coffee she clutched in her hand was her only lifeline to getting through what was sure to be another stressful day. Her high heels clicked rhythmically against the polished floors as she made her way toward the elevator bank. As she approached, she spotted Leonard again. He was standing near the reception desk, talking to some of the building staff. Grace slowed her pace, her curiosity piqued. There was something about the way Leonard interacted with everyone that didn't quite match her assumptions about him. He greeted the security guard with a warm handshake and exchanged pleasantries with one of the janitors, calling them by name as if they were old friends. His demeanor was relaxed, confident, and familiar. Grace watched from a distance, puzzled. Why did he seem so comfortable with everyone here? Most employees were too busy rushing to meetings or focused on their phones, barely acknowledging the staff who kept the building running smoothly. Leonard, on the other hand, seemed to move through the space with a quiet authority that didn't align with the image Grace had initially formed of him. Her mind wandered back to their previous encounters in the elevator. Each time she had seen him, she had assumed he was just another employee, someone with a low-level job or perhaps a visitor. But the more she saw him, the more she felt like she was missing something. Grace shook her head, brushing the thoughts aside. There were more important things to worry about. Today was going to be intense, and she couldn't afford to get distracted by idle curiosity about Leonard. She stepped into an open elevator, but just as the doors began to close, she caught a glimpse of Leonard glancing in her direction. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Grace quickly looked away, feeling a flicker of embarrassment she couldn't quite explain. Later that day, the office buzzed with uneasy energy. It started with whispered conversations in the break room, subtle glances exchanged between coworkers, and cryptic messages on company email threads. By lunchtime, the rumors had spread like wildfire. There were talks of a major restructuring. And not just any restructuring, layoffs. Big ones. Grace sat at her desk, her her stomach twisting in knots as she listened to snippets of conversations around her. "Did you hear? They're saying half of marketing could be cut," said Emily, the same colleague Grace had lunch with the other day. Her voice was low, but the fear in it was unmistakable. "I don't know about half, but I heard they're targeting underperforming departments," Brian added, leaning against the doorframe of Grace's office. "Everyone's walking on eggshells. Even Linda's been quiet today." Grace felt a cold wave of anxiety wash over her. Her department had been performing well, but was it enough to keep them safe? The presentation she had given suddenly took on even more weight. If the CEO didn't like her ideas, would that put her on the chopping block? She hadn't even met him yet, but now her entire career seemed to hinge on whether or not he approved of her work. She tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on her tasks, but it was impossible. The uncertainty gnawed at her, making it hard to concentrate. Every time she glanced up from her computer screen, she saw her co-workers whispering in hushed tones, their faces pale with worry. By mid-afternoon, Grace couldn't take it anymore. She decided to head to the break room for a cup of coffee, hoping the walk would clear her mind. But as she entered the room, she overheard more of the same nervous chatter. "They say the CEO is directly involved in the restructuring," one woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's reviewing all the departments, project by project." Grace's heart sank further. If the CEO really was that involved, then her presentation was even more critical than she had realized. She had to make a good impression. Her entire future depended on it. But the pressure felt overwhelming, and the more she thought about it, the more anxious she became. She stood at the coffee machine, absent-mindedly stirring sugar into her cup when Linda walked in. Grace straightened up, forcing a smile as her supervisor approached. "Grace, have you heard anything new about these restructuring rumors?" Linda asked, her tone professional but tinged with concern. "Just the same whispers as everyone else," Grace replied, trying to sound calm despite the storm raging inside her. "Do you think we should be worried?" Linda sighed, leaning against the counter. "It's hard to say. The CEO likes to keep things close to the chest. But I'll tell you this, he's very thorough. If he's reviewing our department, it means he's going to look at every detail, every project, including yours." Grace nodded, her heart sinking. "Right? I'll be ready." Linda gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm confident in your work, Grace. Just keep doing what you're doing, and everything will be fine." Grace appreciated the encouragement, but it did little to ease her nerves. As Linda left the room, Grace stood there for a moment, staring down at her coffee cup, lost in thought. The weight of the day pressed down on her, and the looming sense of uncertainty made it hard to breathe. While Grace battled with her growing anxiety, Leonard was sitting in a sleek conference room on one of the upper floors, surrounded by department heads and senior executives. The atmosphere in the room was calm, but serious, a stark contrast to the tension brewing among the employees below. Leonard listened carefully as the leaders of each department presented their updates and outlined their strategies for the upcoming quarter. He had spent years building this company from the ground up, and while he valued growth and profitability, he also believed in fostering a strong company culture, one that emphasized diversity, inclusion, and integrity. Today's meeting was focused on reviewing projects across the company, with an eye toward the upcoming restructuring. Leonard was a hands-on CEO, and he believed that in order to make the right decisions, he had to understand the work his employees were doing at every level. As the head of the marketing department spoke, Leonard's attention was drawn to a project that had come up in the last review, Grace's presentation. Her work had been mentioned in passing during the meeting, and he had made a mental note to review it more thoroughly. He didn't know Grace personally, but her name had come up more than once in discussions about promising talent within the company. Grace's proposal for the new marketing strategy shows a lot of potential, the department head said, flipping through a series of slides on the screen. "She's innovative, ambitious, and has a clear vision for how we can modernize our approach." Leonard nodded thoughtfully. He liked what he was hearing, but he was also a man who valued actions over words. He would need to see the results of Grace's work for himself before making any final decisions. As he jotted down a few notes, his thoughts wandered briefly to his recent encounters with her. He remembered seeing her in the elevator several times over the past few days, her hurried demeanor and subtle discomfort around him unmistakable. Leonard was no stranger to such reactions. He had experienced them throughout his career. People often made assumptions about him based on his appearance, and while he had long since learned to ignore it, he couldn't help but notice Grace's behavior. She had gone out of her way to avoid sharing an elevator with him the first time they met, and even after acknowledging him in passing, she still seemed uncomfortable around him. It wasn't blatant, but Leonard had an eye for subtle behavior, and he could sense the tension in her presence. But Leonard was not one to jump to conclusions. He had seen too much in his life to let one or two brief encounters define his opinion of someone. Still, he kept an eye on Grace's progress, curious to see how she would handle the pressure of the upcoming review. As the meeting continued, Leonard listened to updates from other departments, but his thoughts kept circling back to Grace's project. He admired her ambition, but he also knew that ambition alone wasn't enough. It had to be backed up by hard work, integrity, and the ability to adapt under pressure. After the meeting concluded, Leonard returned to his office and pulled up Grace's presentation on his computer. He skimmed through the slides, impressed by her attention to detail and the creativity of her approach. But as he read, he couldn't help but wonder how she would handle the news of the restructuring once it became public. Leonard leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the sprawling city skyline. Change was coming, and it wouldn't be easy for anyone. But it was necessary. The company needed to evolve, and that meant tough decisions had to be made. As he sat there, he thought again about Grace's reaction in the elevator. People often revealed their true character in small moments, and Leonard had learned to pay attention to those moments. He wasn't ready to make any judgments yet, but he would be watching Grace closely in the days to come. The fourth day started much like the others, but there was a heavy sense of anticipation in the air. Grace had been invited to a high-level meeting with the company's senior staff, and her nerves were on edge. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a chance to sit in the same room as the CEO and discuss the future direction of the company. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. As she sat at her desk, preparing her notes and reviewing her presentation for what felt like the 100th time, a mixture of excitement and dread coursed through her. She had worked hard, and the feedback so far had been promising. But now, the real test was in front of her. The CEO's review could determine everything, not just for her project, but for her future with the company. Grace glanced at the clock, her heart pounding in her chest. The meeting was only an hour away. She took a deep breath, stood up, and made her way to the executive floor. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor passing by in slow motion as her mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. The rumors of restructuring still loomed, adding an extra layer of pressure. When she arrived at the conference room, several senior executives were already seated, reviewing their notes and speaking in low voices. Grace found her assigned seat near the middle of the long, polished table, careful not to sit too close to the head. The room was sleek and modern, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. She could feel the importance of the meeting in every detail, from the high-end leather chairs to the discreet placement of water glasses in front of each attendee. Grace couldn't shake her anxiety. The CEO was still a mystery to her, a figure she had built up in her mind. She had imagined him to be someone distant, intimidating, and unapproachable, a powerful executive who wouldn't notice someone like her. She busied herself by arranging her papers, trying to look focused and prepared. But her thoughts kept circling back to Leonard. She hadn't seen him since the previous day's encounter in the lobby, and the memory of their brief interaction still left her feeling unsettled. There was something about him, his calm confidence, his unhurried demeanor, that kept gnawing at her. Suddenly, the door to the conference room swung open, and the room fell silent. Grace looked up, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Leonard. Casually, almost effortlessly, Leonard entered the room. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding but not overbearing. He walked confidently to the head of the table and took his seat as if he had done this 1,000 times before. For a moment, Grace couldn't process what was happening. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before her. How could this be? The man she had avoided, the man she had dismissed in the elevator. He was the CEO? The realization hit her like a freight train, and her stomach dropped. Leonard was the CEO. The same Leonard she had brushed aside. The same Leonard she had been silently judging. Grace felt her face flush, her heart racing as the weight of her assumptions came crashing down around her. She quickly looked down at her notes, hoping no one noticed her reaction. But inside, she was in turmoil. How could she have been so blind? How could she have made such unfair assumptions about him? Simply because of how he looked. Leonard wasted no time as he began the meeting, his tone direct yet approachable. He introduced himself to the team, though it was clear most of the senior staff already knew him. Grace sat frozen in her chair, still processing the revelation as Leonard spoke. "I want to thank you all for coming today," Leonard said, his voice calm and steady. "As you know, we're at a pivotal moment for the company. There are big changes ahead, and the work you've been doing is critical to shaping our future. I've had the chance to review many of the projects across different departments, and I'm impressed with the creativity and dedication I've seen so far." Grace listened intently, her earlier confidence shaken. She had been so eager to impress the CEO, and now the CEO was the very person she had misjudged. Leonard's words seemed to take on new meaning as he spoke about the values of the company, about collaboration, diversity, and mutual respect. "We've built this company on the foundation of recognizing potential in everyone," Leonard continued. "No matter where they come from or what they look like. It's not about appearances. It's about integrity, hard work, and the ability to see beyond the surface." Grace felt the words hit home. She knew he wasn't calling her out directly, but the message was unmistakable. Her mind flashed back to the elevator rides, to the assumptions she had made about Leonard, and the discomfort she had felt in his presence. She felt a knot of regret tighten in her chest. As the meeting progressed, Leonard discussed the company's direction and the upcoming changes. He addressed the restructuring rumors head-on, acknowledging that there would be some difficult decisions in the weeks to come, but also emphasizing the importance of staying focused and continuing to deliver high-quality work. Then, Leonard turned his attention to specific projects. He began reviewing the work of various departments, offering feedback and insights as he went along. When it was Grace's turn, her heart raced. "I'd like to take a moment to highlight the work done by the marketing team, particularly Grace's recent proposal," Leonard said, glancing briefly in her direction. "Her ideas show a lot of promise, and I believe they could help us modernize our approach in key areas." Grace's face burned with both pride and embarrassment. He was acknowledging her work, yet she couldn't shake the memory of how she had treated him. Leonard's praise felt bittersweet. While she was thrilled to be recognized, she couldn't help but feel ashamed of her previous behavior. Leonard continued without dwelling on their encounters, his focus remaining on the work itself. Grace felt a small sense of relief, but she knew the real conversation was still to come. After the meeting ended and the rest of the team filtered out, Leonard asked Grace to stay behind for a brief chat. Grace's nerves returned in full force as she gathered her things, her mind racing once again. What was he going to say? Would he bring up the elevator incidents? Would he reprimand her for her behavior? She followed Leonard into his office, a spacious room with large windows that bathed the space in natural light. Leonard gestured for her to take a seat, and Grace sat down, clutching her notepad as if it were a lifeline. Leonard sat across from her, his expression calm but serious. "I wanted to speak with you about something that's been on my mind," Leonard began. His tone was gentle, not accusatory, but Grace still felt her stomach twist with anxiety. "I couldn't help but notice our interactions over the past few days. In the elevator, in the lobby." Grace's heart sank. He had noticed. Of course he had. She had been so caught up in her own assumptions that she hadn't even considered how her behavior might have come across. "I want you to know, I'm not bringing this up to make you feel uncomfortable," Leonard continued. "But I think it's important that we address it, not as a critique, but as a learning opportunity." Grace swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize who you were. I made assumptions about you, and that wasn't fair." Leonard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We all make assumptions, Grace. It's human nature. But the key is to recognize when we've done that and be willing to learn from it. I'm not upset, but I do want you to think about how we treat people, whether we know their title or not. Everyone here plays a role in this company's success, from the janitors to the executives. We can't afford to let biases cloud our judgment. Grace felt a deep sense of shame, but also a strange sense of relief. Leonard wasn't angry. He wasn't reprimanding her. Instead, he was offering her a chance to grow, to reflect on her behavior, and come out stronger on the other side. I've learned a lot these past few days, Grace admitted, her voice steadying. I see now that I was wrong to make assumptions based on appearances. I'm truly sorry for the way I acted, and I promise to do better. Leonard smiled, a warm, reassuring expression that eased some of Grace's tension. That's all I wanted to hear. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about how you handle them when they happen. And I can see that you're someone who's willing to learn and grow. That's what's important. Grace nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, but in that moment, she realized something profound. She had been so focused on impressing the CEO, so consumed with her own ambitions, that she had overlooked the basic principles of respect and humility. But now, she had a chance to correct that, to move forward with a clearer understanding of what truly mattered. Leonard stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. Keep up the good work, Grace. I'm looking forward to seeing where your ideas take us. Grace smiled, standing as well. Thank you. I won't let you down. As she left Leonard's office and made her way back to her desk, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she now had a deeper understanding of the values that would guide her. In the end, it wasn't about titles or appearances. It was about integrity, respect, and the willingness to grow. And Grace was ready to embrace that lesson fully. Grace woke up early, her mind still processing the events of the previous day. The revelation that Leonard was the CEO had shaken her to her core, forcing her to confront her own biases and assumptions. As she got ready for work, she couldn't help but replay their conversation in her head. Leonard's words echoed in her mind. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about how you handle them when they happen. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her blazer and taking a deep breath. Today was a new day, a chance to put into practice everything she had learned. The shame she had felt yesterday had transformed into determination. She was ready to face the day with a new perspective, one that looked beyond surface-level judgments and embraced the diversity of experiences around her. As Grace entered the lobby of the office building, she found herself paying more attention to the people around her. The security guard who always greeted her with a smile, the janitor who kept the floors spotless, the receptionist who juggled multiple calls with ease. She had barely noticed them before, but now she saw them as integral parts of the company's ecosystem. She approached the elevator, and for a moment, she hesitated. This was where it all began, where her assumptions about Leonard had first taken root. As the doors opened, she stepped inside, remembering how she had once tried to avoid sharing this space with him. Now, she felt a twinge of regret at the thought. Just as the doors were about to close, a hand reached out to stop them. Grace looked up to see Leonard stepping into the elevator. Her heart raced, but not out of discomfort this time. Instead, she felt a mix of respect and a desire to make amends. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," Grace said, her voice steady and warm. Leonard smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good morning, Grace. And please call me Leonard. How are you doing today?" "I'm doing well, thank you," she replied, feeling more at ease than she ever had in his presence. "Actually, I wanted to thank you again for our conversation yesterday. It's given me a lot to think about." Leonard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. Growth often comes from moments of discomfort, doesn't it?" Grace couldn't help but smile. "It certainly does. I've realized how much I was missing by not looking beyond my initial impressions of people." As they rode up together, Grace found herself engaged in a conversation that felt natural and enlightening. Leonard asked about her background, her aspirations, and her thoughts on the company's future. She spoke openly, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him now that she had let go of her preconceptions. When they reached Grace's floor, Leonard held the door open for her. "Before you go," he said, "I wanted to let you know that I'm holding a company-wide meeting later today. I think you'll find it interesting." Grace nodded, intrigued. "I'll be there. Thank you, Leonard. As she walked to her desk, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. The day ahead held promise, and she was determined to approach it with an open mind and heart. News of the upcoming company-wide meeting spread quickly through the office. Whispers and speculation filled the air as employees wondered what big announcement was coming. The tension from the previous days hadn't fully dissipated, but there was an undercurrent of excitement mixed with the anxiety. Grace sat at her desk, trying to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to the meeting. She couldn't help but wonder if it had anything to do with the restructuring rumors or her marketing proposal. As she glanced around the office, she noticed the nervous energy that seemed to permeate the space. Emily, her co-worker, approached her desk with a worried expression. "Hey, Grace," she said in a hushed tone. "Have you heard anything about this meeting? People are saying it could be about layoffs." Grace paused, considering her response carefully. She remembered Leonard's words about the importance of every role in the company. "I don't have any inside information," she said honestly, "but I think we should try not to jump to conclusions. Whatever the announcement is, panicking won't help." Emily looked surprised by Grace's calm demeanor. "You seem different today," she observed. "Did something happen?" Grace smiled softly. "Let's just say I've gained a new perspective on things. We're all in this together, Emily. No matter what happens in that meeting, we need to support each other." As Emily walked away, looking slightly reassured, Grace noticed Brian hovering nearby. He had overheard their conversation and approached with a skeptical expression. "That's easy for you to say, Grace," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Everyone knows you're on the fast track. Your job is probably safe no matter what." Grace felt a pang of guilt at Brian's words. She realized that her ambition and focus on climbing the corporate ladder had sometimes made her seem aloof or uncaring to her colleagues. It was time to change that perception. "Brian," she said, meeting his gaze, "I know I've been focused on my own career, but that doesn't mean I don't care about what happens to everyone else. We're a team, and if changes are coming, we need to face them together." Brian's expression softened slightly. "I guess you're right. It's just this uncertainty is killing me. I've got a family to support, you know." Grace nodded sympathetically. "I understand. Look, why don't we grab lunch after the meeting? Whatever happens, it might help to talk it through." Brian seemed surprised by the offer, but nodded in agreement. As he walked back to his desk, Grace felt a small sense of accomplishment. She was already putting her newfound understanding into practice, reaching out to colleagues she had previously kept at arm's length. Throughout the morning, Grace found herself engaging more with her co-workers, offering words of encouragement and support. She realized that her previous focus on impressing higher-ups had blinded her to the importance of building strong relationships with her peers. Now, she saw how these connections could create a more positive and productive work environment for everyone. As the time for the meeting approached, Grace gathered her things and headed to the large conference room where it would be held. She couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Whatever Leonard was about to announce, she was determined to face it with an open mind and a commitment to supporting her colleagues. The large conference room was packed, with employees from every department crowding in. The air was thick with anticipation as people whispered theories and speculations. Grace found a seat near the middle of the room, noticing how the crowd seemed to naturally divide into cliques and departments. She made a mental note to try and break down those invisible barriers in the future. As Leonard walked in, the room fell silent. He strode to the front with purpose, his presence commanding attention without being intimidating. Grace couldn't help but marvel at how differently she saw him now, compared to just a few days ago. "Good afternoon, everyone," Leonard began, his voice strong and clear. "I know there have been a lot of rumors and speculation about the future of our company. Today, I want to address those concerns head-on and share with you our vision for the future." He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with various employees. When his gaze met Grace's, she saw a flicker of acknowledgement. "First, let me be clear. Yes, there are changes coming," Leonard continued. "But these changes are not about cutting jobs or downsizing. They're about growth, innovation, and creating new opportunities for all of us." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Grace could see the tension visibly leaving her colleagues' shoulders. We're embarking on an ambitious expansion plan, Leonard explained. We're not just growing our existing departments. We're creating entirely new divisions focused on emerging technologies and markets. This means new roles, new challenges, and new chances for each of you to grow and contribute in meaningful ways. He went on to outline the specifics of the plan: a new AI division, an expanded sustainability department, and a revamped approach to marketing and customer engagement. As he spoke about the marketing changes, Grace felt a surge of pride. Many of the ideas he mentioned were directly from her proposal. These changes will require all of us to adapt, to learn new skills, and to collaborate in ways we haven't before, Leonard said. It won't always be easy, but I believe that together, we can create something extraordinary. Grace looked around the room, seeing a mix of excitement and apprehension on her colleagues' faces. She understood their feelings. Change was always daunting, even when it promised growth. Now, I know some of you might be wondering how these changes will affect your specific roles, Leonard continued. Over the next few weeks, each department head will be meeting with their teams to discuss the details. But I want to emphasize something important. Every single person in this room has a place in our future. Your skills, your experience, your unique perspectives, they're all valuable as we move forward. Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest at these words. She thought about her conversation with Leonard in the elevator, about the security guard in the lobby, about Emily and Brian. Everyone had a role to play, a contribution to make. But this isn't just about the company's growth, Leonard said, his tone becoming more personal. It's about your growth too. We're going to be investing heavily in training and development programs. We want to give each of you the tools and opportunities to expand your skills, to take on new challenges, and to advance in your careers. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room once more. I've always believed that a company is only as strong as its people. And looking around this room, I see incredible strength, diversity, and potential. That's why I'm confident that together, we can turn this vision into reality. As Leonard concluded his speech, the room erupted into applause. Grace found herself clapping enthusiastically, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. She glanced at Brian, who was seated a few rows away, and saw a mixture of relief and cautious optimism on his face. After the applause died down, Leonard opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up across the room, and he patiently addressed each concern and query. Grace was impressed by his openness and the way he engaged with employees at all levels, from senior managers to junior staff. As the meeting came to a close, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The fear and uncertainty that had dominated the office for days had been replaced by a buzz of excitement and possibility. People lingered in the conference room, forming small groups to discuss the announcement and its implications. Grace found herself at the center of one such group, with colleagues from various departments asking her opinion on the changes. She spoke enthusiastically about the opportunities ahead, emphasizing the importance of collaboration and mutual support. As she talked, she caught Leonard's eye across the room. He gave her a small nod of approval, and Grace felt a surge of pride. She realized that she had come a long way in just a few days, from someone focused solely on her own advancement to someone genuinely invested in the success of her colleagues and the company as a whole. The meeting had ended, but Grace knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the company, but for her personal and professional growth as well. In the days that followed the announcement, the office was abuzz with activity. The fear of layoffs had been replaced by a fervor of preparation for the upcoming changes. Grace found herself at the center of much of this activity, as her marketing proposal had become a cornerstone of the company's new direction. One morning, as Grace was reviewing some documents at her desk, she heard a tentative knock on her cubicle wall. She looked up to see Brian standing there, a slightly sheepish expression on his face. "Hey, Grace," he said, fidgeting with a pen in his hand. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," Grace replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" Brian sat down, looking uncomfortable for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to apologize for what I said before the meeting. You know, about you being on the fast track and all that. It wasn't fair of me to assume things about you." Grace felt a rush of empathy for Brian. She recognized in his words the same kind of assumptions she had made about Leonard. "There's no need to apologize, Brian," she said warmly. "We've all been under a lot of stress lately. I understand where you were coming from." Brian nodded, looking relieved. "Thanks. It's just when Leonard started talking about the new AI division, I got worried. I'm not exactly up to date on the latest tech stuff, you know? I thought I might be left behind." Grace leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Brian, that's exactly why Leonard emphasized the training programs. This is a chance for all of us to learn and grow. Have you thought about which areas you might be interested in exploring?" Brian's eyes lit up slightly. "Well, I've always been curious about data analytics. Do you think there might be a place for that in the new structure?" "Absolutely," Grace said enthusiastically. "In fact, I was thinking about putting together a cross-departmental team to work on integrating data analytics into our new marketing strategies. Would you be interested in being part of that?" Brian's face broke into a genuine smile. "Really? You want me on your team?" Grace nodded. "Of course. Your experience in customer relations would be invaluable. Plus, we could learn the new analytics tools together." As they continued to talk, Grace felt a sense of satisfaction. This was what Leonard had been talking about, recognizing the potential in everyone, looking beyond surface-level judgments to see the unique value each person brought to the table. Over the next few weeks, Grace threw herself into the preparations for the company's new direction. But this time, her approach was different. Instead of focusing solely on her own projects, she made a conscious effort to reach out to colleagues across different departments, fostering collaboration and idea sharing. She organized brainstorming sessions that brought together people from marketing, IT, customer service, and other areas. In these meetings, she made sure everyone had a chance to contribute, often drawing out quieter team members and highlighting their ideas. One day, as she was leaving one of these sessions, she ran into Leonard in the hallway. He smiled warmly at her. "I've been hearing great things about these cross-departmental meetings you've been organizing, Grace," he said. "It's exactly the kind of collaborative spirit we need right now." Grace felt a flush of pride at his words. "Thank you, Leonard. I've learned so much from working with people from different backgrounds and expertise. It's amazing how many innovative ideas emerge when we break down those departmental silos." Leonard nodded approvingly. "That's precisely what I hope would happen. You know, Grace, when I first reviewed your marketing proposal, I was impressed by your strategic thinking. But seeing how you've embraced this collaborative approach, how you're bringing people together, that's leadership." Grace was taken aback by the compliment. Thank you," she said, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I'm just trying to put into practice what I've learned, especially from our conversations." Leonard's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, Grace, there's an opportunity I'd like to discuss with you. We're forming a new team to oversee the integration of our various initiatives, ensuring that our expansion aligns with our core values of diversity, innovation, and collaboration. I think you'd be an excellent fit to lead this team." Grace's heart raced at the prospect. It was a significant step up, a chance to have a real impact on the company's future. But instead of the purely personal ambition she might have felt before, she found herself thinking about the potential to create positive change on a larger scale. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity," she said carefully. "Can you tell me more about what this role would entail?" As Leonard outlined the responsibilities of the position, Grace listened intently, her mind already buzzing with ideas. She thought about Brian and his interest in data analytics, about Emily's creative problem-solving skills, about the insights she had gained from talking to people in different departments. "I'd be honored to take on this role," Grace said when Leonard finished speaking. "But I have one condition." Leonard raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued. "Oh, and what's that?" "I want to build a truly diverse team," Grace said firmly. "Not just in terms of demographics, but in skills, experiences, and perspectives. I want to bring in people from all levels of the company, including some who might not typically be considered for leadership roles." A slow smile spread across Leonard's face. "Grace, that's exactly why I want you for this position. You understand that true innovation comes from diversity of thought and experience. I think you're going to do great things in this role." As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Grace felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought back to that first elevator ride, to the assumptions she had made about Leonard based on nothing more than his appearance. How different things might have been if she had never confronted those biases, if she had never learned to look beyond the surface. 6 months later, Grace stood in the lobby of the office building, a sense of déjà vu washing over her. So much had changed since that fateful day when she had first encountered Leonard in the elevator. She smiled to herself, remembering how far she had come. The lobby was bustling with activity, but this time, Grace noticed every detail. She saw the security guard, whose name she now knew was Mike, greeting employees with a warm smile. She waved at Maria, the janitor, who was diligently polishing the marble floors. At the reception desk, Samantha juggled phone calls with her usual efficiency, shooting Grace a quick thumbs up as she passed. As Grace approached the elevator, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Brian, grinning widely. "Morning, boss," he said cheerfully. "Ready for the big presentation?" Grace laughed. "As ready as I'll ever be. And please, I've told you 100 times, you don't have to call me boss." Brian shrugged good-naturedly. "Force of habit. But seriously, you've earned it. The work you've been doing with the integration team is incredible." As they stepped into the elevator together, Grace felt a surge of pride. Her team, handpicked from various departments and levels of the company, had exceeded all expectations. Brian, with his newfound expertise in data analytics, had become an integral part of their success. The elevator doors were about to close when a hand reached out to stop them. Grace's heart skipped a beat as Leonard stepped in, a warm smile on his face. "Good morning, Grace, Brian," he said, nodding to each of them. "Big day today, isn't it?" Grace nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "It is indeed. We're presenting the results of our first 6 months to the board." Leonard's eyes twinkled. "I've had a sneak peek at your report. I think the board is going to be very impressed." As the elevator ascended, the three of them fell into easy conversation. Grace marveled at how natural it felt, how far removed from the tension and discomfort of their first encounters. When they reached the executive floor, Leonard held the door open for Grace and Brian. "Good luck with your presentation," he said, "though I doubt you'll need it. You've done exceptional work, both of you." Grace and Brian thanked him, then made their way to the boardroom. As they walked, Grace couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The boardroom was intimidating, with its long mahogany table and stern-faced executives. But as Grace began her presentation, she felt a calm confidence wash over her. She spoke about the successes of the integration team, highlighting the innovative ideas that had emerged from their diverse perspectives. She talked about the mentorship program they had implemented, pairing senior executives with junior staff from different departments. She detailed the cross-functional projects that had led to breakthrough solutions in product development and customer service. Throughout the presentation, Grace made sure to highlight the contributions of her team members, giving credit where it was due. She saw Brian beaming with pride as she discussed the impact of their data analytics initiatives. As she concluded, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, the board members began to applaud. The CFO, a woman known for her tough questions, leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Thompson," she said, "I must say, I was skeptical when I heard about this integration team. But the results speak for themselves. You've not only met our expansion goals, but have created a model for collaboration that could transform our entire corporate culture." Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "But the credit really belongs to the entire team. We've learned that when you bring together people with diverse skills and perspectives and give them the space to innovate, amazing things can happen." As the meeting concluded, Grace and Brian left the boardroom, both riding high on the success of the presentation. In the hallway, they ran into Leonard, who was waiting with a broad smile. "Congratulations," he said, shaking both their hands. "You've done something truly remarkable here." Grace felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Leonard, for everything. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the lessons you taught me." Leonard shook his head. "I may have opened the door, Grace, but you're the one who walked through it. You took those lessons and turned them into action. You've become the kind of leader this company needs." As they stood there, Grace couldn't help but think about how much had changed. She remembered the woman she had been 6 months ago, so focused on her own success that she had been blind to the value of those around her. Now, she saw the potential in everyone, from the CEO to the newest intern. Grace said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about implementing a company-wide initiative. Something to encourage all employees to challenge their assumptions and broaden their perspectives. Leonard nodded approvingly. That sounds like an excellent idea. What did you have in mind? Grace's eyes lit up as she outlined her plan. I was thinking we could start with a series of workshops. Not just diversity training, but real, hands-on exercises that push people out of their comfort zones. We could have employees from different departments shadow each other, or set up mentorship programs that pair unlikely partners. Brian chimed in, his enthusiasm evident. We could also create a platform for sharing personal stories. Like how Grace's experience changed her outlook. It could help others see the impact of their assumptions. Leonard listened intently, a proud smile on his face. I think you're onto something powerful here, he said. This could be the key to creating lasting change in our corporate culture. As they continued to discuss the idea, bouncing thoughts and suggestions back and forth, Grace felt a profound sense of purpose. She realized that her journey hadn't just been about personal growth or career advancement. It was about creating a ripple effect, spreading the lessons she had learned throughout the entire organization. She thought about the future, about the initiatives she wanted to implement, the changes she hoped to see, the lives she might touch. There was still so much work to be done, so many minds to open and perspectives to broaden. But as she pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the bustling city street, Grace felt ready for the challenge. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the skyscrapers. Grace paused for a moment, looking up at the towering building she had just left. It wasn't just an office anymore. It was a place of possibility, of growth, of transformation. With a smile on her face and determination in her heart, Grace set off down the sidewalk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn and grow. And she couldn't wait to face them, armed with the wisdom she had gained and the compassion she had cultivated. As she walked, Grace made a silent promise to herself. She would never again let appearances or assumptions cloud her judgment. She would approach each day, each person, with an open mind and a willingness to learn. And in doing so, she hoped to inspire others to do the same, creating a ripple effect of understanding and empathy that would extend far beyond the walls of their office building. The story of Grace and Leonard, of assumptions challenged and perspectives changed, was just the beginning. It was a reminder that in the world of business, as in life, the most valuable lessons often come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, all it takes is a simple elevator ride to set in motion a journey of profound personal and professional growth. What would you have done if you were in Grace's position, discovering that a simple judgment had led to a life-changing revelation? Would you have faced the truth about your assumptions and embraced the opportunity for growth? Or would you have hesitated? If you enjoyed this story of unexpected encounters, self-reflection, and personal transformation, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put a lot of effort into creating these impactful narratives, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being a part of this journey.